Comics are a scam. Well, hold on. Comics aren't a scam. Graphic novels are. Well, not really. Okay, wait, hear me out. In the never-ending battle to legitimize the comics medium to the masses who think that comics equals superheroes, marketing has had to get clever. Their answer? The graphic novel. Not the format, but the term graphic novel. Gone were the days of funny books made for weenie little babies, and here were the gritty, serious graphic novels for adults who got mortgages to pay and midlife crises to have. But what is a graphic novel? The first documented use of the term graphic novel was in a 1964 issue of the CAPA-ALPHA newsletter. CAPA-ALPHA being like the MLA for nerds. The graphic novel as a format had been around for several decades before it was actually given a name, specifically the trade paperback volume, or TPB for short. These were usually reprinted collected editions of newsstand weeklies like, Binko and Dinkus, and were usually printed and bound like the average paperback novel at the time. But the term graphic novel wasn't ever really used in publication before being popularized in the 70s. There are a few books that could claim fame to the first book to call itself a graphic novel, including Richard Corbin's Bloodstar and Will Eisner's A Contract with God. You can't really talk about A Contract with God without talking about the circumstances that led to it labeling itself as a graphic novel. It's something that I'll explain in more detail in an eventual video about Frederick Wortham, but the main gist of it is, Frederick Wortham says comics bad. The industry says, okay, maybe that's facts. The Comics Code Authority is made and they say, hey, no violence, sex, drugs, or fun. The industry says, okay, maybe that's facts. Comics are made more kid-friendly and shift towards superheroes. The underground comics movement says, actually, that's not facts, f*** you. And they make their own comics with violence, sex, drugs, and, well, sometimes fun. The industry says, hey, wait, maybe the Comics Code Authority actually ruined public perception of comics because everyone conflates comics with superheroes now. Whoops. The industry says, okay, we need to legitimize comics again, but we can't call them comics because that's for little babies. And that's how we got to the graphic novel. The goal was to market comics, or sequential art, or whatever the hell you want to call them, as something that adults could feel comfortable with reading in public, unlike underground comics. Marvel quickly followed the trend by putting out their first original graphic novel, or OGN, we'll get to that later, in 1978 through their Fireside Books imprint. The Silver Surfer by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. Fun fact, this was actually the last book they worked on together. Why they didn't work on anything else after that, I don't know. The Fireside Books imprint had been reprinting old comics in trade paperback format for several years at that point, but The Silver Surfer was the first book-length comic to consist of all new material. This was then followed by Marvel's Marvel graphic novel line in 1982, which was then followed by DC's DC graphic novel line in 1983. The big paradigm shift in the, well actually, graphic novels are for adults movement came in the mid-80s, with the releases of books like Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, V for Vendetta, and Mouse. With these more mature books all being collected in trade, the industry realized, wait, we could actually ride this adult comics wave and brand these as graphic novels to reel in that big boy audience. And from that point onwards, the term graphic novel kinda just lost all meaning. Were they a format, or were they something to distinguish the high art from the regular schlock that the industry had to offer? Were graphic novels just the result of really clever marketing to make people feel smart for reading comics? Are graphic novels even real? Am I real? Alright, but what is a graphic novel? I mean, with all this talk about the history of the term, what is the criteria for something to be called a graphic novel? First off, comics are an art form and a medium. That medium has several formats within it, one of them being the graphic novel. In other words, not all comics are graphic novels, but all graphic novels are comics. It's a rectangle square type situation. But there's also a lot of different subformats, so let's go through all the various formats to distinguish what's what. The single issue, or floppy. The most common comics format, at least in North America, is the magazine format single issue, otherwise known as a floppy. Yep, that's the name they went with. A floppy is usually put together with staples and has anywhere between 22 to 60 pages, not counting ads or the front and back covers. The graphic novel. For regular books, those things that smart people read, novels are usually designated based off the number of words in a story. You can't really do that with a graphic novel, but there are other qualifiers that can help narrow it down. A graphic novel is bound, so it's got a spine. It's a comic, just making sure we don't forget that. Page-wise, there's no maximum, but the minimum is roughly 90 pages. I conducted a poll on Twitter asking what people thought the minimum page count of a graphic novel should be, and the results seem to point towards that number. Also, follow me on Twitter. The original graphic novel or the original hardcover. This refers to a book that's graphic novel length and contains only new content and nothing reprinted. 1971's Black Mark by Gil Kane and Archie Goodwin is the first American comic that meets the criteria for an original graphic novel. The trade paperback or hardcover volume. These are actually generic terms since they're only referring to the print format of the book and not how the story is organized. But usually these terms refer to either a paperback or a hardcover graphic novel that collect multiple single issues worth of story, otherwise known as a volume. There isn't really a maximum to the number of issues they contain other than the spine obliterating itself, but the minimum is usually 4 issues and the average is 6 to 12 issues. The omnibus. This is just a bigger version of the previous format. These contain a larger amount of issues, either covering an entire story or collecting a huge chunk of a series run. But a compendium is like the same format, but it's a paperback. So why not just call it an omnibus, Image? But wait, the Hellboy omnibus isn't a hardcover, it's a fucking paperback! What the fuck? The graphic novella. Yeah, I didn't really know this existed either, but if the graphic novel is a type of novel, then there's gotta be a graphic novella too. These are shorter stories, not as short as a single issue, but not as long as a graphic novel. They fit in that nice sweet spot between 60 to 90 pages, and usually tell a complete story. They're also bound together like a regular graphic novel, which separates them from being single issues. Some good examples of this would be Brubaker and Phillips's Pulp and God Loves Man Kills. And that's it really. Most of it's just semantic bullshit, and there's no agreed upon number for any of the issue or page counts that I mentioned. But as long as you know that it's all comics, it's all good. So if someone ever tells you that graphic novels are for adults or they're not the same as comics, just, I don't know, smack them upside the head and call them a wee-wee head. The shift towards the graphic novel also brought upon a new trend in comic storytelling, with readers starting to favor reading their stories in volumes rather than single issues. Thus began the act of writing for the trade and trade waiting. But that's for part 2 of this video, so I'll see you there. Or not. I mean, it's your choice. I mean, you choose what order you want to watch these videos in. I'm not the boss of you.